So thank you very much. My name is Robert Hoehndorf. I'm from King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia. I'll talk, it's a very nice anniversary, 10 years, keeping a service that also has not been funded or did not receive any dedicated funding up and running. And I will tell you a bit about what we are working on now to move this into the new age of more AI. So I will start with ontologies and what they are. So basically ontologies, in my mind, I don't actually talk about what they are. If you ever talk to an ontologist and want to have a 2-hour debate about it, then you ask them what they think an ontology is. I want to talk about what they provide. So what can they do? So they provide some identifiers, standardized identifiers that we can use in databases so that we can integrate data. And this is mainly done automatically. So most people here will not know what Go 0008150 stands for. Yep. Okay. I said this to the wrong crowd. But they provide labels. Labels are great for humans to find things. It's great for people who want to do text mining. So labels for classes or concepts or whatever you want to call them. So they are really nice for retrieval as well. They provide definitions. So if some people want to argue about what this really means, try to read up what this term is defined at, what it really should mean, when to apply it. So you get some guidance. And then there's a fourth component that ontologies provide. And this is something primarily for machines. And this is machine-readable axioms. So parts of the meaning of the terms or classes or concepts or whatever you want to call them in ontologies that will be accessible to a machine. And this talk will primarily be about this because this is what AberOWL is about. But I first want to talk about other ontologies. We had this very great talk about BioPortal. And I think everybody here uses BioPortal. And there are many, many ontologies there. It's basically the key point that BioPortal tries to do is it collects all the ontologies. Every ontology that is there in the biomedical field or outside, you'll find it in BioPortal. It's a great place. And there are other ontology portals. So there's OLS. It's by EBI and it's really useful. So if you're a curator, you really want to look up a term and browse the ontology, I find it a bit more intuitive than BioPortal. It's really, really usable. It's a great tool. And then there's ontology by Oliver Hay and his group. And this is for the OBO Foundry mainly. It provides Sparkle queries, so you have API access and so on. So there are great ontology repositories out there. Why did we need AberOWL? So what's the point of having AberOWL? When you look at what these repositories do, they provide identifiers, all of them, IRIs. They provide labels. You can always get the label. You can, of course, get the definition. But there's one thing that they do not do. You can usually retrieve axioms. You can see them, except in BioPortal, you don't really see them very well. But anyway, usually you can retrieve them, but you cannot use them. And what they do not provide is access to reasoning over the axioms in the ontology. And this is what AberOWL is about. So basically, when we started AberOWL, we said, well, there are formal axioms in ontologies. There has been 100 years of people hours spent, years spent in creating them. Lots and lots of effort went into creating these formal axioms, but they're not used by any of these repositories. And we can use them, for example, to derive some implicit facts if we want to retrieve things like not by their name or by their ID, but basically by some property. And this property is not already asserted. You have to infer it. So if you want to find all disorders of the heart, for example, from a disease or a phenotype ontology, you will have a hard time. You will not be able to see whether your query is in itself contradictory. So this is detecting contradictions or consistency. So you will not get this. And the main use case for this was ontology-based data access. And I'll talk about this because this is what AberOWL was about 10 years ago. And we'll see what it becomes now. So let's see what I mean by using these axioms. So essentially, but first, just a basic summary. AberOWL was designed to create a very, very lightweight interface around a description logic reasoner, at the time called ELK. We think about using something else now, but anyway, at the time around ELK. So it was primarily designed for machines to access some data through a standardized API and run description logic queries. Of course, it also came with some not really nice interface. It never was really the best interface, very, very usable and user-friendly, but we needed it to basically debug things, to have people understand what they're doing and look at this. So what it provides is real-time reasoning over OWL ontologies. It's under BSD3 clause license. So this is, it's free software, but this is the unique feature that no other ontology repository provides or has provided. And it was designed so that we can do ontology-based data access. And I will talk about what this means. So let's say you want to query, I don't know, mice or health records or something for ventricular septal defect, a kind of heart defect, using human phenotype ontology or some other phenotype ontology. And usually what you get is you do some text search, right? You can do some text search. If you have an ontology, you can also use what's called a hierarchy, right? Hierarchical queries, if you have some predefined hierarchy. But so this is the first thing that AberOWL enables. So if you don't have any kind of reasoning, you basically get a text search. But if you have some reasoning in AberOWL or some other types of reasoning, you get at least subclasses, including, for example, this inlet ventricular septal defect, which is a direct subtype if you look at human phenotype ontology. Or you get something that is a bit more complex, which has this ventricular septal defect kind of as a component part, a necessary phenotype, but it has many other ones, which is this tetralogy of Fallot, which is actually a disease in omen. So you can retrieve the records based on not just a query by text or some text-based retrieval, but you get some inference. You can do this the other way around. You can also query, for example, for tetralogy of Fallot. Now you take an ontology that defines a tetralogy of Fallot as these four phenotypes. So basically, whenever you have these four phenotypes of ventricular septal defect, pulmonary stenosis, right ventricular hypertrophy, and the overwriting aorta, doesn't matter. It's a logical definition. This is what it means to be tetralogy of Fallot. Whether you agree or not, but this an ontology can define it. It's like this is the term I say. This is what it means to be a tetralogy of Fallot. Now, if you want to have patient or mice or something where these four parts are listed separately, nobody put them together, or they came at different times, or they were asserted automatically, or you never had a tetralogy of Fallot detector, but you had like some image analysis tool that only looked at these four particular parts and asserted these four parts. Then you still retrieve tetralogy of Fallot with, if this is your query, you can retrieve these records because the logical inference is whenever you have these four phenotypes together, asserted anywhere, you will have a tetralogy of Fallot by this formal definition. So this is something that you can rarely get without explicit inference. And then you can do other things. You can, for example, ask for phenotypes of the interventricular septum. This is not even in your language, right? So this is not in your language, and you can make this more and more complex. You can use intersections or unions and other kind of expressions. So this is open-ended queries with an explicit semantics. And you can, of course, not put this in a database because it's open-ended. There is no limit to the type of query that you would want to get an answer to. So this is something for which you definitely need to have reasoning and access to some form of reasoning here. So AberOWL does essentially serve here, or a description logic reasoner, as a bridge between a database query and a logical expression. And then finally, you can also go get some queries will basically be rejected directly. Basically, if you ask for anything that has both a microcephaly and a macrocephaly, right, you would want to say, nah, this is nonsensical. It cannot be that there are any answers in a meaningful database. So it would reject it, and you get an explanation for why it would reject this. So the way in which AberOWL originally implemented this and still implements this is by Sparkle query rewriting. So the way this works is, I just go through the middle part. The middle part is the important part. Essentially, it's a way in which you embed a description logic query in Manchester OWL syntax using a special syntax in a Sparkle query. The AberOWL service will rewrite this, return the IRIs from the ontology, and in the end, bind it to some variable or whatever you want to do. So it just becomes a list in Sparkle. And unfortunately, there are two different syntaxes for lists in Sparkle. So it does it in two different ways, depending on what kind of where you use this list. And then you can run this query. So this is, for example, our standard example if you want to query for proteins that are involved in a part of apoptosis in UniProt. And you can run this query against UniProt, and you will get something that you could not run on the UniProt Sparkle endpoint or website or similar, because you do not get all the IRIs. Okay, so this was AberOWL when it was conceived. And it's been running since 2015. It did all of this. It's been up most of the time, although it didn't have any funding. And not so many people use it. It's not really for people to use. As I said, the interface is not really great. It has sparks here and there. But people start building their web services and websites on AberOWL if they want to have this ability to query and they don't want to implement OWL API or a wrapper around OWL API on their own. So for this, it's been used by also not so many people, but by some people. And for literature mining, for example, if you want to do a PubMed query for every paper that mentions a part of apoptosis according to Go, then you can do query expansion using Go, and you can just do query AberOWL, expand it, and directly go to PubMed. So people use it for something like this. Okay, so what are we doing now? And there are three things that we're working on. So the first one is we have AberOWL 2. It's as almost a complete rewrite of the front end and the APIs. And it becomes federated and containerized, so you can basically deploy it very easily locally. But we also have an umbrella where we basically have distributed so very lightweight ways in which you have one ontology if you want to browse it yourself. Then we have some fair API, and then we work on agents that use AberOWL or access to AberOWL through agents. So let's first thing, there are two use cases for having this containerized. It already works. You can just try it. I'll give you the URL in the end. So basically, AberOWL now is basically a lot of individualized servers. You can put them in Kubernetes or something, and then they all register to a central server. This is nice because you can just deploy it locally. For example, if you don't want Protégé for whatever reason, because it might be too slow or a little bit clunky, and you just want to see some changes that you have made by an agent or by anything else, so you just basically get a lightweight web interface. No need to run Protégé. You can see what changes you make, and people can use it for ontology development. So this is what we use it for in some cases. And then the other one is just this federated architecture. So there, AberOWL just becomes a registry for all these servers, which we still host for now. We also have fair API. I'm going to skip this for time reasons, but it's essentially a particular metadata ontology that is being used, and then some standardized access to different ontology repositories. And then the third one is the question of, and this was the question we had, how do we actually make use of LLMs, and what's the point of AberOWL and these kind of queries, description logic queries, when we have LLMs and agents? And so what we get is logical axioms. And if we just ask an LLM with RAG or with whatever you want, you ask it for questions on whether a tetralogy for hello, what is this, does it involve the heart? You get a probabilistic answer in almost all cases. So you can increase this probability, make it more and more correct, and so on. But if you have an ontology and if you run this query, right, you get a provable answer. You get a proof, a mathematical proof. There's nothing probabilistic about the right-hand side. So what we are trying to do is basically get an LLM agent to provide provably sound answers whenever it can, and then rely on probabilistic answers, any kind of probabilistic knowledge, when it cannot provide a provably sound answer. So it gets some guarantees. And the nice thing is that we have sound and complete algorithms for exactly this type of reasoning. So all we need to do is give an LLM access to it. There's one big problem, and this is basically, we have started, I don't have a demo, and I'm out, but you can try the code. So it works most of the time. The big problem is to take English to a DL query. And that is not so trivial. So there's still some probabilistic parts. So you reduce, although the answer then will be provably sound and correct, but generating the correct query, given some ontology or some big repository of ontology, that's still a challenge. So this is only, it's not satisfactorily working. But anyway, this is basically what we have done in 10 years. Not much progress for a long time. Now we are updating AberOWL. A lot of updates in the last year on AberOWL, and there's more to come. But essentially what we get is we're going to get this distributed ecosystem. It's basically working. We have this neurosymbolic agents that use AberOWL. They don't have to use OWL API and so on. They don't need all the resources to even reason over ontology locally. They will basically be able to call AberOWL. It already works, but the translation of English to description, logic, syntax, still a challenge, not solved yet. And then at some point, we also want to go beyond AberOWL, maybe using some neurosymbolic reasoners in some cases. So with this is 10 years of AberOWL. It's a reasoning first ontology repository. Try it out. API works. Try out AberOWL 2. I was hoping, I was actually not showing this because I was afraid you can try it here, right? With only just few ontologies, you can try this. I was not showing it in the beginning, but since because I thought you're going to break it if too many people go there. But basically, internet doesn't work anyway, so should have shown it in the beginning. Okay, thank you very much.
Questions?
Oh, thanks. I really great talk, and I really enjoy the formal structure of an ontology and an ontological query. I'm wondering, is there any possibility of applying the ontological principle to research in a direct way? So as to say, like, variants in conserved genomic regions are more abundant in patients with cancer, for example. Like, is that a line of research that anyone is pursuing and sort of automating research in that way?
Yeah, this is a good question. I don't have a good answer. My answer would be, the problem is once you do science, you have probabilistic questions. It's not, this is logic. So there's no probability here. It's either true or false, at least in an ontology and the type of reasoning that we do. In science, you need to build causal models, causal structures, still combine this with deduction. And I do not have a good answer because I do not know who is working on this. I think I would look at neurosymbolic and causal models. Maybe there's one talk, my student will talk tomorrow about causal knowledge graphs. It goes into this direction, but it's not an answer on its own yet. It's a very, very beginning.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Very nice developments there, Rob. So I want to kind of push on the neurosymbolic part. It seems you're using the term to refer to kind of agentic systems that will use AberOWL to do these crisp deductive queries. But your group is also pioneering other kinds of neurosymbolic models where you're taking kind of like logical axioms and embedding them in vector space. Are you thinking of kind of exposing that and kind of exposing DeepGo, SE, and all of the other kind of like amazing tools that come out of your group through this mechanism as well? Or is... Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you. It's the rightmost side here. And the big problem with that is that we use reasoning because we want to have a sound and a complete answer. And all the methods that we do are giving probabilistic answers to logical questions. And we would use them if you reason over incomplete knowledge bases. Somehow you have some incomplete knowledge and you want to still get an answer that complies with your logical axioms that you have. And this gap is something, if you have some ideas, I would love to discuss it because we have been thinking about it. We have experimented with Sparkle, but with OWL, it just eludes us how best, it's not really clear to us how to put this in.
Yeah, let's chat later.
Any other sorry.
Thank you. Hi, yeah, Rob, that's great talk. Yeah. So I know your lab has also been developing some other semantic tools, right? Some of them are quite famous. So I'm wondering if you can integrate your other tools, like those semantic reasoning calculation, similarity calculations, for example, together with your AberOWL tool in some way.
Yeah, it's a good. We do not know exactly how to do it in all cases, or rather, we do not always know why we would do this. So there are some tools we can integrate. So for example, we would perform semantic similarity queries over inferred axioms, and we can define them, and we can define some sets, and then we can compute similarity, and these sets can be defined based on a class description instead of an ID or a label. And we have experimented with this. This works well. But the other one, it's not only the question about technical, what is technically possible. It's also why. So it's why do we want to do this? We use reasoning to, if we want to have, so we use this type of reasoning over ontologies. If we want to have an answer that we are guaranteed to be sound and complete, it's an answer for which we have, it's a mathematical proof, no probability, there's no hallucination. So our algorithms, if they are correct, will give us a proof, a mathematical proof. And an LLM does not do that. So the question is, if we take something that is approximate, we need to know exactly how this fits into what we get here. Because the big limitation of an LLM in my mind is they hallucinate, they will not always give the correct answer. We always get the correct answer from biological knowledge. It might be that our query is wrong. But if we use a reasoner, the answer is guaranteed to be correct. And if we look at the big gaps are LLMs hallucinate, you get a sound, you get a proof here every time. And if they can use this as a tool whenever they can, you reduce this uncertainty. And in my mind, this is the main, so pushing back on this uncertainty of an LLM as much as we can, that is what we can get here. And if we add something, a lot of the other tools that we do is still approximate, and they essentially do what LLMs do, and arguably they might do it better or worse in some cases, but they are essentially in the same category in my mind. So this is the question, what is the use case that we're trying to solve, at least with this, pushing back as much as we can the probabilistic answers that LLMs gives us and replace them by a mathematical proof whenever we have the opportunity to do this.
I'll do one more because you're inspiring so much discussion. So actually now I realize that maybe the problem is the data, right? That our data is probabilistic and we really rarely get absolute truth, right? And we can't force the experimentalists to fix that, I guess, right? So maybe there are some ideas about bridging there. Do you have any comments on that?
Ontologies are, in my mind, are absolute truth, because if you have a tetralogy of Fallot, it's defined like this, with these 4 phenotypes. If it does not have these 4 phenotypes, it is simply not whatever you call a tetralogy of Fallot according to this particular ontology. Something else, maybe somebody else will call it the same thing, but that's something different. So it's not about language use and so on. So in my mind, an ontology, at least in this sense, is cannot be wrong. It can be that it's not practical, not useful, and not how we divide up the world in categories, but it cannot be wrong. So I assume this to be true. And you hear me fussing about a lot when I talk to ontologists about how most of the ontologies, if you put them together, are not consistent, because this is really a problem for something like this, because then I can't do any reasoning. This is more of a concern to me, that our data, that we build these and they're not consistent. This is a problem, because then we don't get any answer that is useful. But that our data is probabilistic, that is a different problem. I think we need different methods. Causal, so structural causal models, some problog or probabilistic logic programming. So we experiment with different aspects on this. There are ways to account for this and still have this semantics. But in my mind, this must be the root. It's the foundation of what we do. If our terminology is already fuzzy, then we are doomed, because then we can't communicate. So our terminology must be right, and we must be able to query this using methods that are not probabilistic. And this is what AberOWL should do, amongst many other things. But AberOWL, this is the purpose, I think, in my mind, this is what AberOWL does.
Thank you very much. And on that note, I'd like to thank all the speakers for their time today.